So here's a little lesson on humans in polar regions. We're going to start off in the Arctic to the north, where you're going to find continents like Europe, Asia, and North America. What's amazing is humans have lived in these regions for tens of thousands of years. Theory states that humans migrated from Asia over to Alaska and North America via the Bering Strait. But the Bering Strait is water. But it wasn't water during the last glaciation. Why would this be the case? Well, oceans evaporated moisture up into clouds, which later precipitated out as snow, forming ice caps and never thawing because it was so cold. So water never returned to the ocean to fill it up. Sea levels therefore reduced. In 1909, Robert Peary was the first person to reach the North Pole. Well, new evidence is showing that he might have missed the North Pole by up to 50 miles. Amundsen, the great Norwegian explorer, also had his hand in the pot. He was the first person to go around Canada to the north via the Northwest Passage. He also was one of the first people to fly over the North Pole. But the first person to fly over the North Pole was Admiral Byrd back in 1926. Antarctica is a completely different story. Around 2,000 years ago, the Greeks theorized that there had to be this great ice-covered continent in the southern hemisphere to offset the landmass of Eurasia in the northern hemisphere. They called this continent Terra Australis Incognita. People spoke of seeing this continent for hundreds of years, and they also spoke of seeing icebergs floating with rocks locked inside, being proof that there was indeed this ice-covered continent. But no one set foot on Antarctica until the 19th century. Amundsen, the very same man who did all the exploration in the northern hemisphere, was the first man to reach the South Pole in 1911. No one else set foot on the South Pole and survived until 1956, when the Americans flew in by plane. This was 1 year before the start of the IGY, or the International Geophysical Year. 12 countries collaborated to better understand polar science. 60 stations were set up in Antarctica alone. This was a wild time. People were setting foot in places where no one had ever been before. Right now we're going to take some time to speak with John Barrett, who was a scientist who went down to Antarctica for 18 months during the IGY.
Well, Antarctica was still unexplored at the time of the IGY, and no one knew how thick the ice was, how high it was, how much snow fell, whether it was increasing or decreasing, and we made a first approximation of those things in a multinational program. In the early days that I went down there, and for about from the 1950s into the 60s, we would fire an explosion and measure the time it took for the sound wave to go down to the bottom of the ice and come back up, and that would determine the ice thickness, because we also had measured the velocity of the sound in the ice. The ice is, on the average, 2 kilometers thick over the whole continent, and some places as thick as 4 kilometers. So it's really basically 1,000 times wider than it is thick. I guess I went for the romance and adventure of it, but I didn't realize that adventures only happen when someone makes a mistake. I had a few adventures. The most exciting experience I had was sitting in the cockpit of a Navy twin-engine airplane in 1960, flying a geophysical survey over the West Antarctic ice sheet, and all of a sudden a mountain came up out of the clouds, and we never did see it, but the instruments told us it was there, and we couldn't fly up fast enough to get away, and we nicked the wing of our airplane on the mountain and dragged our instrument off on the ground and did not crash. The ground came up from 3,000 feet to 1,500 feet in 30 seconds, and from 1,500 feet to less than 50 feet in the next 30 seconds. And the plane was stalling out and rocking from side to side. So I was really scared, but I was writing elevations and other data down in a data book. The pilot was trying to fly the airplane, the navigator was trying to navigate, and it wasn't because we were brave or anything like that. It's just in a situation like that, you just do what you're doing. It's beautiful. Antarctica is, that's why so many people go back over and over again. Of course, the seals and the penguins and the icebergs that people who go down on ships and tourist expeditions see. But the ice sheet and the vastness of it and beautiful mountains, although there aren't, it's almost all ice, and the beautiful colors when the sun sets, and it gets in your blood, and a lot of people who work there keep going back. Things are happening quite dynamically in Antarctica. When you say they move at a glacial pace, that's not as slow as most people would think that term would mean. There's 90% of the Earth's fresh water is tied up in Antarctic ice. If this were to melt as a result of climate change, which it may eventually, the West Antarctic ice sheet melting would raise sea level about 6 or 7 meters, and the East Antarctic ice sheet, in combination with the West Antarctic ice sheet, would raise it about 60 or 70 meters. That would flood every port city in the world, would change the configuration of low-lying areas like Florida and the Gulf of Mexico area and Bangladesh and islands in the Pacific.